All right, so now we have part 4 of this shaila. Screen. So part 4 of this shaila. Shimon hechazik berechev yakar b'tkufa shematzavo hakalkali hayatov. Shimon, when things were financially good for him, was able to get a hold of an expensive car. And now he's hit hard times. To the point where he has to go to the community fund for tzedakah. He could, if he sold his car, he could get enough to live off of for a year without taking from tzedakah. Is he obligated to do so? So it seems, I don't know why he's presented this as a separate shaila, because it seems, based on everything that we've seen up until now, that yes, you do have to liquidate your assets if you're going to be taking from the community fund, even if it's an essential living utensil, but it's something that you could liquidate and get something less expensive to do the same function. You're obligated to do so. So he says, "Kvar hikdamnu le'el she'ani harotza lekabel mehatzdaka afilu b'tzina meyechidim." We've already pointed out before that if you want to be able to accept tzedakah, even if it's from private individuals, not from the community chest, מחייבים אותו למכור קודם לכן את כל הכלים שאינם כלי בית הצריכים לגופו. He's obligated to first liquidate all of the utensils that are not living essential items, אם יכול להשיג על ידי זה רזוז, provided that you can get enough to live off of that sale for a year. היינו סיכום שיכול לחיות ממנו שנה. אולם אין מחייבים אותו למכור בהפסד, but you're not obligated when you're collecting from private individuals to take a loss on the sale of the items. לפי זה בנידון דנן, שמעון צריך למכור את הרכב שלו, מכיוון שיכול להשיג ריש זוז ממכירתו. So according to this, Shimon would be obligated to sell his car. He can get enough to live off of for a year from selling his car. היינו סיכום שיכול לחיות ממנו שנה. And he's not allowed to dip into the tzedakah fund because by selling a car secondhand, meaning even though you might have bought it new, and you're certainly going to be getting less for it than what you paid for it, but since you've gotten use for it and you're selling it as a used car, that's not called taking it at a loss because you're getting proper blue book value for it. So a person can't argue, well, if I sell my car, I won't be getting what I paid for it. Well, of course not. But that's not called taking a loss. And that, I guess, is the only chiddush that he wanted to point out, is that even though, yes, the used car market is not as lucrative as the new car market, and this is a used car, but nonetheless, and I don't even know why he's got another shaila about this. And so we'll just continue. He says, "Be'inyanim ani chayav limkor kelav, kishehem shavim sikum sheyachol lichyot bo shana." A poor person is obligated to sell his assets in a situation where he can get proceeds that will allow him to live out the year. So this is a continuation, he says. He says, we need to analyze a bit further what is called selling something secondhand without taking a loss. He says, on the one hand, it's like the situation that the Gemara describes, where real estate values universally go down in value. Hainu kasher mashim masigim biyad shiniya mishakefet ha'erech ha'amiti va'az eino rashai lekabel tzedakah af im yitzarech limkor. And therefore, even though you're selling it for less than what you paid for it, but that sale price is reflective of its current true value, and therefore you would be obligated to sell your car before you take tzedakah. Kevin she'enu mafsid b'mechira kamoshit bar b'tshuva hakodemet. And there, since you're not losing money through the sale, okay? Ulam ba'ofanim mesuyamim ma shemasigim bazeh eino kedai liba'alim. He says, but there are certain situations where the proceeds from the sale are not worth it for the owner. So b'chein b'nidon dinan. So therefore, in a situation that we just illustrated, where a guy has let's say a more expensive upscale car, and im kashe b'miuchad, let's say he has a Mercedes, im kashe b'miuchad limso konim l'rechev yakar kazeh. He says, let's say it's harder to find buyers for that level of quality of car. Uchedei limkor maher, and in order to sell it off quickly, yitzarech limkor behefsid gadol, he would have to sell it at a loss. In other words, it's at below blue book value, I suppose. Az she'ilatenu eina domeh lehuzal arata dekulei alma. So then it's not comparable to a situation where the Gemara talks about real estate values going down for everybody. Ela la'okir arata dekuli alma v'didei aidi da'il v'nafik azuze zal are. But rather, there's a case that's described in the Gemara that everyone's real estate values has gone up, but because he's in need of cash quickly, everyone knows that they can exploit him and give him a low price. He says, in a situation where you're not able to get the true value in cash for the item that you wish to sell, you would therefore be allowed to temporarily accept tzedakah until you're able to find someone who will pay the true value of the item you wish to sell. Now, this is very, this could potentially be subjective, and it would probably require a third party to arbitrate a situation like that. Mm-hmm. It could be a big loss for the individual, but at the same time, there's so many different factors. Let's say, for example, a guy is in sales, and he gets a huge sale, but it was a one-time sale, and he figures he acts irresponsibly, and he blows it all on a really, nice sports car. Well, then there's a dry spell in his market, and he doesn't make another sale for 6 months. So what are you going to tell him? He says, look, Rabbi, I need some money for Yantiv. I said, and you're driving the Maserati in our parking lot? And you're the guy who needs tzedakah? He said, yeah, but I haven't been matzliach for the last 6 months. I say, well, what about liquidating your Maserati? And he says, I could never get who's going to buy my Maserati for the price that I paid for it? I said, well, who told you to buy a Maserati? In other words, there has to be, there's got to be some objective way of looking at this. Did the person act responsibly when he first bought the luxury car? Maybe he didn't, and that should be a factor at least in my opinion. I mean, it's just a bit of an embarrassment to give someone tzedakah when they're driving a Maserati. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration. So And if it's a red Maserati or a yellow Maserati, that would make it even more acute, right? Okay, I don't think I'm not going to go look in the Meforshim on this. Let's go on to the next Shaila. Be'inyan sone matanos yichya. Now we have this principle in the Gemara called "He who despises gifts shall live." Asone matanos yichya, and there is a value like that in Judaism, that a person should avoid, whenever he can, should avoid accepting gifts. Because number one, because you become beholden to others, and sometimes the feeling of obligation to others is much greater than the actual value of the gift that you've received. And then but there are other reasons as well. Another reason would be that a person who makes a habit of not accepting gifts, there's an ethical sort of character that you develop within yourself of being self-sufficient and not relying on others and not becoming dependent and not becoming a taker and so forth and so on. Okay, so the question is, Ha'imutar latet matana lechatuna shelichaora keven sha'asur lekabel matana desoni matanos yichya kamokein asur latet matana. This is it's a bit of a silly question in my opinion. Is it permissible to give gifts to give wedding gifts? What about the principle of Hasone Matanos Yichya? You don't want to become beholden to others. So aren't I, by giving someone else a gift for their wedding, contributing to that person's sort of degradation, because now he's going to be beholden to me? So the answer is tshuva mutar latet matana lechatuna v'chein mutar lekabla. It is permitted to give wedding gifts, and it's permitted to receive wedding gifts. That's obvious. V'ayin hatam b'bi'urim, and we'll explain in our commentary. So let's take a look at the commentary for here. Tchila yesh lahakdim she'ein isur lekabel matanot. So first of all, there's no prohibition of receiving gifts. K'moshe mavur b'shulchan aruch v'zeh l'shona. The Shulchan Aruch actually talks about this. It says, Midas chasidus shelo lekabel matana. It's considered to be an act of virtue, what's called Midas chasidus, a piety, not to receive gifts. Elo liftoach b'Hashem she'yitein lo deimach saro shenemar b'sonei matanos yichi. But rather, you should place your trust in God, that whatever deficits you have, Hashem will augment. As it says in Mishlei, he who despises gifts shall live. That's the direct quote from the Shulchan Aruch. So you see that even from the language of the Shulchan Aruch, it's only considered an act of piety to conduct yourself in this way. The Rama also says, the only restrictions on accepting gifts are when you want to accept tzedakah. That's the only restriction where we have to determine, are you truly poor? Do you need to liquidate your assets first, etc. But to accept the gift from others, that you're always allowed to accept. It's not that it's a handout, not that it's an act of charity because Nebuch, they want to make sure you're taken care of, but a person wants to give you a gift, so that you're for sure allowed to accept. As the Gemara says, that if a person wishes to benefit, he should benefit like Elisha. Now, what's the story of Elisha? Elisha was a prophet in the Sefer Malachim, and he used to whenever he would travel to a certain place, he would stay at a certain post. They set aside a special room for him in their home, and made it nice for him because they wanted to benefit a holy man like Elisha. And Elisha modestly accepted the gift. He didn't consider it to be an act of charity that they were doing for him, but they were privileged to host him. So the Imkain, Bevadai she'ein hanotein tzarich lachush mishum lifnei iver ke'enu machshil et hamekabel b'shum isur. And therefore, you're not doing anything wrong by giving someone a gift. You're not causing them to stumble in any kind of halacha, because it's perfectly permissible for someone to accept the gift. The ode. And then furthermore, he says, Bishut Tashbeitz Katab is Elishono. He says, the Tashbeitz is, I believe, from the 17th century. He says, V'gam hachachamim ein genai lahem lekabel mehem hana. He says, there's nothing wrong with a Torah scholar accepting some kind of benefit or favor from someone else. Mihu imratzu hachachamim limnoa atzmam shelo lekabel hana mishum adam. Yesh bazeh tzad chasidut. However, if a Torah scholar wishes to restrict himself and not receive favors from other people, there's a certain piety involved in that. V'yesh bazeh tzad she'ein ra'ui limnoa atzmam mizeh. But on the other hand, there are other times when it's more appropriate to accept favors from other people. V'hakol lefi ha'inyan, and it all depends on the circumstance. Sometimes a Torah scholar is actually might be insulting another person by refusing a favor, right? Or may make someone feel bad if he refuses a favor or a gift, and it all depends on the circumstance. V'sheyu kol ma'aseim l'shem shamayim, and therefore, as long as a person is acting for the sake of heaven, you should use that as his guide. V'amru beper kama debrachos amar Rava harotze lehanos yehene ke'elisha, that if a person wishes to benefit or get favors from others, he should do so like Elisha the Navi. Perush, what that means is she'im kibel hanam ibnei adam, that if you are accepting a favor from another, ein baze iser klal, there's nothing wrong with it. Shaharei Elisha kibel hana mehashunamit, because Elisha would accept favors from the Shunammite woman who was the hostess. V'harotza shelo lehanos al yehene kishmol haramasi. But the Gemara also says that if you wish not to benefit from others, not to receive others' favors, then you have someone to rely on, because that was Shmuel's attribute. That is to say that if you refuse favors from others, that's not considered to be an act of arrogance, right? Because there's an instance in Tanakh when Shmuel refused to accept a favor. Wherever he went, he took care of his own lodgings. In other words, he traveled with provisions and set up a tent wherever he went, because he didn't want to benefit. The contrast between Shmuel and Elisha is very direct. Elisha, when he traveled, sought out lodgings from someone who he knew felt privileged to be able to host him. But on the other hand, Shmuel said, if I'm going to be traveling, I'm not going to put someone out and ask them to stay in their house. Even though I could find someone who might feel privileged to host me, I'd rather take care of my own accommodations. I mean, we find this all the time. People, let's say, before there was Liberty Suites, so close to Thornhill, people would come to the community and they would say, I'm looking for a place to stay. We're just a family of 6. It's not a big deal, right? Right? So what do you do in a situation like that? So it depends. Why are you coming to what brings you to Thornhill for Shabbos? Well, we've decided we just wanted to get away for a vacation. So this is the voice in my head speaking. I've never said this out loud. You're coming to get away for a vacation, so you'd like to put someone out and have them put up a 6-member family in their home for Shabbos and maybe over Sunday as well. You have to think to yourself, like, why? In other words, is that appropriate? But then there may be another circumstance where a person is coming, there's a family simcha, and it's a very large family, and there's no place for them to stay, and they have to come for the bar mitzvah. They need a place, so that's a totally different situation. Okay, the ayin sham shematza kama makomos. In other words, there are many places where people did benefit and accept favors, and then there are places where people did not accept favors. So we'll finish this in Mirza Hashem tomorrow and go on to the next tshuva. Have a